Good evening, and I hope you had a delightful Christmas and the fun still continues. I'm Robyn Williams, and today I shall be in conversation with someone who hopes your festivities were also a touch green. Not too much waste, a little more sustainability, but fun nonetheless. Katie Patrick is the force behind Green Pages, now in its second edition. It may look like a flash telephone book, but it also has thoughtful, illuminating articles and entries that tell you something useful about the green enterprises you're looking up. Katie Patrick, who's based in Redfern in Sydney, is looking at you from one of the Green Pages pictures in the company of a smiling Al Gore. So it's the second year of Green Pages, is it, Katie? How did the first year go?
Oh, the first year was wonderful. I mean, we launched Australia's first comprehensive directory of sustainable businesses. It wasn't just a first in Australia, but it was a first in the world. And so the second year we just built on that and made it even better. So, yeah, it's a very exciting place to be.
How did you make the selection? Was it anyone who was vaguely green and away they went, or did you make sure that they were green?
We do make sure by reviewing them, but the criteria involved in deciding what company is green, what company is not green, is a very complicated process, as you would imagine that a brick is a completely different product to a major financial institution. So you need to have a very different reviewing process. And we have the criteria online. It's 55 pages long, and it's taken a huge amount of research to decide, where to set that bar for all of those different types of products that are there in the market.
Yes, but I imagine that you'd be fairly strict, and occasionally do you bump people off if they lapse?
We bumped someone off today. We don't bump people off very often because usually companies don't go backwards, they just go forwards. But there was actually a financial advisory company that had a socially responsible criteria, and then they decided they didn't want it anymore because they wanted to invest in gambling. And so we said, okay, bye.
Gambling?
Yeah, they changed their mind. They said, we were doing SRI, which is socially responsible investment. We want to do casinos now. And so we thought, not good for Green Pages.
Did they have an explanation other than the Gordon Gekko one?
Well, no, I didn't speak to them directly, but one of the salespeople sort of explained the situation to me, and I said, no, they've got to go. Really nice people, but,
yes,
we have
okay.
to... we have to keep the bar there.
Yeah, I know just how you feel. Okay, so it's a way of enabling people to select green companies, but at the front of Green Pages you have a number of major articles, feature articles in fact, which include fashion and various building, and as you'd expect. Have you expanded those from last year?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We put a lot of effort into making the front half of the directory a really sexy and fun, modern sort of magazine style of product because, we want, our whole company mission is to, apart from supporting green businesses, to make green living fun and sexy. I don't want to be stuck working in an industry where everyone's, completely drab and miserable and talking about the pains of the world and wearing awful clothes. We're young, urban professionals. So it was really exciting to be able to put such a good quality magazine together and work with good designers.
And there's no contradiction there, being fashionable. And the whole point about fashion is it's ephemeral. It changes all the time.
The point about fashion... I suppose fashion is also just something that you have to do. We all have to wear clothes unless you're really into being a nudist.
No, but for instance, my own clothes, I've bought the same sorts of sandals for the summer, which are New Zealand school sandals, since 1977.
Yeah, I noticed. They're really fashionable. They're great. Do you know if they're sustainable or not?
I have no idea.
Oh, we'll have to check them out. Maybe they are.
Well, presumably because they're done in mass production for the school kids of New Zealand. I suppose they would be, except the airfare going to buy them.
Oh, I know, it's so complicated adding up all these different environmental issues in a product. But going back to the issue of, design and sustainability, if it's environmental, does it have to be ugly? Absolutely not. I don't believe
Not
that
ugly,
whatsoever.
but ephemeral, because fashion changes by definition. It's on a regular cycle of, the season. The season changes. So if you've got stuff that's no longer fashionable, by implication you chuck it out or recycle it in some particular way, but nonetheless you increase the amount of stuff that you get.
There was a new terminology that came out of our article, which was landfill fashion. And one of the writers sort of was speaking to the designers that we had in our recent eco-fashion parade. And the reason why we included her in the book was that she was completely focused on making sustainability produced very sort of classic designs that were made to last And you don't really see that so much in labels now because, they are sort of going for that high turnover type of stock. And also working with Akira, he very much has that philosophy of designing really sort of, classically beautiful designs that will last a long time. And, bringing up this issue about landfill fashion, they're making fashion really cheap, really nasty, and it falls apart. And then the next season you're on to the next thing. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, I don't believe.
Fine, but you do check, even with fashion adverts, with fashion connections, that they're not simply saying we are green, but we're into turnover as well. In other words, we're into the sort of growth mentality which seems to be against sustainability. Do you worry about that in the directory?
Yeah, well, in terms of the modern economy, you have to sell things to survive. So it is a bit of a dichotomy there. We do need to sell things. Every company needs to keep going. Even at Green Pages, we need to sell books and magazines and make sure all the people that are in there are selling products as well. But the agenda is to sell it as sustainably as possible. We always choose the top sustainability performing companies that are in that market sector. So, we're just really trying to shift sort of the mainstream across to that sort of top 5% sustainability performing companies in the market, rather than saying stop consuming altogether. We're going on a great new sort of radical bent and we're going to buy nothing,
Here's your one hair shirt for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Well, what about building? Tell me, there's plenty of building and furniture and things like that.
Oh, what's happening in the property industry right now is just fantastic. It's where I started off my career, working in the construction industry. And when I started about 6 years ago, really nobody knew what was going on in green. I was straight out of university and I didn't really understand the construction industry and they didn't understand green, and we were all sort of trying our best. But now, with the launch of the Green Building Council, you've got almost 500 commercial buildings, which are very complicated buildings to design and to build, with Green Star certifications. You're seeing a whole raft of building products taking on Good Environmental Choice, which is a eco-labelling certification program to make sure that they can get into the Green Star buildings. And you're seeing thousands of Green Star certified professionals, which are usually architects and engineers, that have to go through this schooling process to get this Green Star certification. And it's really turned the industry around. Not even to mention the movement that's happening with government tenders, where many government tenders are now specifying that they will only move into a 4 or 5 Green Star certified commercial building. So all of the major developers, of course, are making sure that they've got the buildings to make sure they get the government tenants. And that didn't even exist a few years ago, and to have it so widespread now is quite a transformation.
Yes, we had Philip Isaacs and Maria Atkinson, she from Green Buildings,
yes.
as you said. You probably know her.
Yeah, I do know her.
Some amazing stories about what is possible in terms of air conditioning and no waste and energy conservation. The possibilities even now
the
are
engineering
amazing.
has come so far. Like with chilled beam technology, the CH2 building, which you may know about, is the world's first 6-star green building in Melbourne. And they freeze the water under the ground in the evening, and then they pump it up through the walls and then through the roof. And then the air naturally flows across the cool chilled beams and creates this natural air conditioning system. Just opening the windows at night, it doesn't seem very revolutionary, but it is in building design. And the list just goes on of so many different things that you can do with construction.
Yeah. I should imagine that having done this sort of work, you are more hopeful than most of us because you can see the shape of things to come, the people who are actually getting on with it.
Yeah, I think I've sort of successfully tunnel visioned myself and my colleagues into looking at the positive side of sustainability, because it's something I just so much believe in. I have a whole company agenda to only ever promote the positive side of this movement. What's exciting, what's fun, what products are groovy, the really positive stories, because there are just so many. And there's been 30 or 40 years of talking about the environmental catastrophes. There's lots of people around doing that. We're involved with so many exciting things, like the launch of the Financial Energy Exchange that Al Gore launched recently.
Yes, I saw a picture of you with Al Gore.
Yes, it was.
How did you
got to
get
meet
on?
him. Yeah, he's a good guy. It's good to have him in Australia, and he's been doing great work. And that movie has really transformed things. So,
Tell me about the Financial Exchange.
what's the Financial Energy Exchange?
Yeah.
So it was just launched in August. I'm on the advisory board of it. And it's set up with the same legal framework, from what I understand, as the ASX, the Australian Stock Exchange. But instead of trading money, it's trading carbon credits. So at the moment, it's a voluntary-based system, but there are about 20 different carbon credit, what would you call them, like manufacturers, tree planters, wind turbine businesses. And so they sell their carbon credits But with the market, they didn't really have any way, like an exchange or a bank, to do it. So they set up this exchange. So now they register with the exchange, and then businesses or individual consumers can come and buy from that. And they know that it's credible, they know that it's audited. Because it can be a bit strange buying like an invisible gas. You don't really know how much or how little.
You don't know whether the trees really are being planted, whether they're going to be kept there for any length of time, whether they amount to the equivalent of whatever you're doing as an offset.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it needs to be all properly audited and sort of properly certified. And this is what this new exchange does. So it's just started, and now when the carbon trading will come in the government says in 2010, it'll really actually start being used. So I think it's an incredibly exciting movement to see these new economies being generated. There's even another one being talked about now, which is ecological credits exchanges, which is a bit more out there, trading sort of the value of an ecological area, like a woodpecker or a wombat, and the financial services figuring out how they value these ecosystems.
Now that could be tricky.
It is tricky. I'm not claiming to understand it. There are people working on it and trying to figure out, like what is the value of a honeybee to an orchard? And that's a sort of an ecosystem service. So if you spray pesticides all over the honeybees, they die, and you have sort of quite an economic impact there. So they work on figuring out the metrics and the kind of trade, of that.
There was a whole background briefing program on that only the other day, and that was to do with the fact that there's a problem actually getting sufficient bees in some places, especially in America, not just to make honey.
No bees. Oh, God.
Exactly, but to make the kind of service, as you imply, to fertilise the plants. The almond industry seems to be in all sorts of dire straits in some places, not so much Australia, but the prospects are interesting simply because of the number of bees available to service the flowers.
There's not enough bees.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Yeah, well, I mean, this is what happens when we destroy the environment.
Yeah.
Not enough bees. I'm sure there's probably not enough worms to help, decompose the soil, and not enough birds laying enough
Careful,
eggs,
you're giving us bad news. Now, you said you were going to be not being Pollyanna-ish, but be upbeat. You're going to be upbeat.
Yes, sorry.
You've been in the ABC too long.
Oh, I just love bees. I feel sad with it. But no, we'll try and put a positive slant on bees. I'm sure there's a resurgence somewhere. Bees coming back. The bee is back. We've got a tagline there.
But you're talking about trading ecological quanta, if you like, one area against another to make sure that the values are being maintained. That's a really interesting concept. How far has it reached so far, do you know?
I think it's still very much in the conceptual phase. Where I know it actually has been practically implemented is the Victorian government have set up a net gain system where property developers, prior to developing in a natural area, they have to add up how much that ecology is worth, and then they have to pay a particular fee to offset that. So if it's too expensive, if the ecological sort of diversity is too rich, then it won't be a good place for them to develop financially. But if they're really dead set on it, then they will have to spend the money, destroy the ecology, and then they'll have to find another site somewhere and then rebuild the ecology, which may be very expensive for them to do.
Sure. Now, we're living in changing times. In the last 2 or 3 weeks, there's been a complete turnaround, not least with our affirming Kyoto. Mm-hmm. Have you been caught up in the mood?
Oh, absolutely. We're all very excited at Green Pages, and speaking with all the companies that we do with Green Pages, they're really excited as well. I met with about 10 different people in Melbourne last week, clients and sponsors, and yeah, they're really excited about being able to work in a carbon trading economy now, because for the last 10 years we've been working in environmental roles or energy efficiency roles and been very frustrated with not being able to have these kind of systems working, and looking over at Europe where they've started to trade and seeing them being so far advanced and just thinking, why are we so hamstrung here in Australia? So finally it's like the leash is off, we've arrived.
Well, I'd be very interested in your comments on the companies themselves, because did some of the companies feel as if they were vaguely fringe, as if this was a kind of gloss on what they did, rather than something deeply serious and a new way of actually trading? Has it changed like that so that you've got more companies feeling, well, this is the way forward?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, it's just seeing it change year by year. I think 5 years ago, you'd get this phenomenon of the environmental manager working at a large organisation, much like I was with my first job, when you were the sort of tack on the side and nobody would take you seriously, and every time an environmental question would come up, they'd ask you about it, and nobody would fire you even though you didn't really do much, but because you were provided that one little bit of green aura in the company. And the CEO and the director would never speak to you or take you seriously, so you'd be there hacking away at the block, and you'd meet other people and you go, does anybody pay attention to you? Do you get much done? And they're like, I'm trying really hard, but I don't think so. Oh, me too. But I mean, that was a few years ago. I mean, now when you see environmental managers, I mean, they've got whole teams like Westpac and BP. I mean, they've got at least 5 full-time people on high corporate salaries who are very educated and know what they're doing, that are a core function to their whole sort of offering. I mean, some companies are more advanced than others, but they are absolutely through the whole vein, the whole skeleton of the organisation, through their human resources, their investing, the sort of day-to-day recycling, their whole commercial movement forward. You're seeing companies start to take it, very, very seriously.
What about the ones who say no, that this is nonsense? Have you come across many of those?
I suppose I don't really talk to those companies. I speak to the ones that are being more progressive. But yeah, I suppose a few years ago, I would come across them, especially some property developers. I had this really funny time with this one developer. One of my friends said, you've got to come and meet these developers. They've got lots of money. They need some green help. Come and meet with them. And they were completely drunk and smoking. And I thought, oh my God, this is disgusting. And then they said to us, we really need an environmental consultant, Katie. Can you please help us? And I was like, yes. And they said, we've got some land in sale and we want to build a greyhound track, except there's bloody heritage listed trees in the middle of it. And we want to figure out how to get rid of the heritage listed trees because the council won't let us get rid of them. And I was like, well, listen, I'm really not that type of environmental consultant. And just sort of explaining the benefits of sustainability in the built environment. And they didn't get it. I don't know what happened to the greyhound track, whether it got built or not, but just that these people were just so far behind and just had no concept of the environment or sustainability. And I suppose there's people still like that around, but I don't really have less to do with them.
It's an extraordinary story, isn't it? I was once a few days ago at a very posh gathering with a leading global sustainability person, a scientist of amazing repute, gave a 1-hour lecture, and afterwards I heard a couple of bankers saying, well, there's still debate on this global warming stuff, isn't there? And a biologist turned around and said, amongst who? And, well, yeah, it's very, very little amongst scientists, but there are still people at the head of a few companies who just insist that the debate is still 50-50, if you like.
I suppose I don't come across that because the business people I speak to, like sort of Noel Purcell from Westpac is absolutely right there, and that's more of my community. And it's been a long time since I've sort of, like you said, you overheard the conversation, since I've overheard a conversation like that. I mean, seriously, you'd have to be a complete moron to not understand basic year 10 science of what a carbon dioxide molecule does in the environment. I mean, most of these people should understand basic chemistry. Like, it's not that hard. And be able to look at different scientific papers that are out there. I mean, you've got the Australian Greenhouse Office, which is a federal government department that has proper scientifically audited standards all over its website. I mean, seriously, I don't care what company you run or how much money you earn or if you manage billions of dollars of venture capital. I mean, to not understand what's going on and to still think that it's not happening is just, it's pretty disappointing.
2 questions for you. How do you keep up with the science yourself? You've got a science background at all?
Yeah, I studied environmental engineering. Yeah, so I feel like I understand science and engineering reasonably well, enough to get by anyway.
And you can keep your engineering expertise?
Yeah, well, I don't work as an engineer, but it's still, I figure it still sounds kind of impressive, to have the degree and to have worked as an engineer for a short time. I read the newspaper, I look on the internet a lot. We have an advisory board for Green Pages that are sort of key people in the industry that I speak to regularly. And just speaking to all the different companies, I mean, if you speak to the directors of the different solar hot water companies, they really know their stuff about what's going on in the different sort of solar market and the different megajoules of gas that are generated versus solar megajoules. And you can get a very good insight through those networks.
And what about the third edition, having just brought out the second? Are you already working on the third?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, and it's exciting. We're putting out our business edition that's coming out in March next year. So that's really sort of where my heart is in the corporate sustainability movement, in being able to really analyse these economic trends, being able to really look at how sustainable business is, creating this sort of spear through the old commercial establishment and, sort of like sprouting this new little like fern on the side of the old building. And really being able to go into the depth of the economics of that through peak oil, through carbon trading, through socially responsible investing. So that's really where our next edition will be pitched. Yeah, so we're all working on that, and that's a great project to be doing.
Look forward to March. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Robyn.
I was with Katie Patrick, the Chief Executive Officer of Green Pages, which, as you heard, has just released its second edition. It contains over 6,000 screened products and services, they say, and as she said, those not reflecting the spirit of sustainability get rejected. Well, next week at this time I shall be in conversation with an old friend, both of mine and of ABC Radio National's, and I hope of yours, Dr. Oliver Sacks, on music and the brain. I'm Robyn Williams.